What is up, crypto peeps? Today I wanted to discuss an update to the Tethered controversy, why it's important for you guys to know this stuff. And I also wanted to go over what the hell the Lightning Network was, how it might impact Bitcoin and Litecoin, and also go over Bitcoin's future according to the charts that we see today. Let's get right into it. Alright, crypto peeps. So before we get into the story, I just want to give out a warning and say, do not park your coins in Tether. Don't use Tether at all. It's too risky. I know we've said in the past that you can use Tether as kind of a holding place for your coins while you're trying to make decisions. But now my suggestion is not to use Tether at all. If you do have any coins in Tether, either take it out in USD or put it into something like Ethereum. I know that we're experiencing a bit of volatility right now in the market, but your coins will be much safer in Ethereum or Bitcoin or something, even though it's volatile right now. The future of Tether is even more tenuous, so you could possibly lose all your coins. So if you have anything in Tether, pull it out right now. So what's happening with Tether? Well, Tether has had sort of a shaky history as of late. In November, if you'll remember, about $30 million in Tether went missing and were unaccounted for, and somehow the story was buried. It was kind of a story, you know, for a minute. People were questioning Tether as to where those funds went and what happened to those funds, and it just kind of died down. And I'm not sure if it's because the market was going crazy at the time and Bitcoin was, you know, close to hitting all-time highs, and there was just a surge in the market towards the end of last year, if you remember, and maybe the story just got buried in there. But over time, you know, Tether has shown to be, I guess, dishonest in a lot of the ways that it behaves. So Tether is basically tied to Bitfinex, and even though Tether denies it and Bitfinex denies it, there was a revelation that came out in the Paradise Papers, which was part of a WikiLeaks leak, that shows that one of the executives of Bitfinex, his name was actually on a bank account that was registered in the Virgin Islands for Tether. So they are clearly tied, and there are some of the same people that are at the top. So with the revelation of the Paradise Papers, with the questioning of the $30 million, more and more people started looking into Tether, and authorities started looking into Tether and questioning, you know, whether it actually had the money in reserve. So when you buy Tether, so say you buy $100 in Tether, Tether is supposed to keep that money in reserves, right? Because the coin is supposedly backed by the US dollar, and there's supposed to be a one-to-one relationship. But what people were suspecting was that Tether, or the people behind Tether, were actually using those funds for a number of different things. There's a suspicion that they were using those funds to buy Bitcoin. And you'll see here the title of this headline, "A little known token may be fueling Bitcoin's rise." I don't know if I would go as far as to say that the only reason that Bitcoin's price has been propped up as of late is because of Tether, but there is some suspicion that they're using our money when we buy Tether to buy Bitcoin and hoard Bitcoin. And the second suspicion is that because Tether and Bitfinex are tied, that Bitfinex is actually using those funds to fuel margin trading. So on Bitfinex, you can margin trade, meaning you can trade on credit. So you don't have to actually have the funds. Obviously, you have to go through a more stringent approval process. But once you're accepted, you can actually trade on margin. And so there's some suspicion that Tether is using our funds when we buy Tether to fuel the margin accounts. So why that's tenuous? Well, if people if everybody who owns Tether starts requesting their money back in US dollars, well, if those dollars are tied up in Bitcoin or those dollars are tied up in margin trading, then obviously the system comes down crashing. Now, I know what you're thinking, or what you're probably thinking, is that sounds a lot like the US dollar. The US dollar is currently not really backed by anything. The banks operate on a Federal Reserve requirement, which allows them to loan 90% of the cash that is deposited in the banks, that you and I deposit in the banks. It allows banks to use those for loans and only have to keep 10% of what we deposit in the banks. That's what the Fed Reserve requirement is. So if everybody goes to their bank requesting their money in cash, the banks are not going to have it. And I know that seems like a double standard. But one thing you have to know is that with fiat, at least in the present time, fiat is backed by the government and by the Federal Reserve and by these, I guess, these structures that have been in place for a long time. So they can fuck with the interest rates, they can print more money if they need to. And when the banks fail, as we saw as a result of the 2008 crisis, the government bails them out with just more money. They just throw more money at the problem. Cryptocurrency doesn't really have those structures at the moment, and they don't really have the backing of something as powerful as the US government. So that's why this is a more tenuous situation. Now, another alarming thing with Tether is that they just fired their auditor. So the person or the entity that was in charge of monitoring Tether's movements behind the scenes and making sure that they do actually have those reserves on hand, that relationship was severed. And then today, the new revelation is that US regulators subpoenaed crypto exchange Bitfinex and Tether. Again, we talked about that Bitfinex and Tether relationship, and now they have been subpoenaed. So if you do have any money in Tether, pull it out. Don't use Tether. Don't use Tether as a way to park your coins. And again, either use USD or put it in something like Ethereum at the moment. But do not use Tether. I'll continue to update you as the story moves along, but it is playing out in an interesting fashion, to say the least. And I do think that this is the beginning of the end for Tether. All right, the second thing I wanted to get into is what the hell is Lightning Netowrk? You may have heard of Lightning Netowrk, you may have not. But Lightning Netowrk is basically a few developers' solution to Bitcoin's problems. And what are Bitcoin's problems? This article puts it, was it this article? No, it was this article. This article actually puts it really well. They call it a trilemma. So not a dilemma, but a trilemma, meaning that there's a problem that, a three-pronged problem that Bitcoin was facing. And the problem is basically, here it states, the problem is it isn't possible to have full decentralization, a fixed money supply, and sufficient liquidity for an efficient payment system. And that's exactly what Bitcoin is going through. And I think that's part of the reason why you're seeing a steady decline in Bitcoin's price. And I think that other cryptocurrencies will start to gain ground on Bitcoin, and Ethereum might end up taking the #1 spot. It's because now, I mean, Bitcoin was definitely revolutionary when it came out, right? The idea of blockchain was revolutionary when it came out, and solving equations through mining and whatnot. That was revolutionary. That was the beginning of all of this. But as with anything, right, you're gonna have the early adopters, I guess, or the early innovators be bumped out by new innovators that have figured out how to do things more efficiently. And I think that's where we're at with Bitcoin. So Lightning Netowrk is basically an attempt to save Bitcoin and continue to shoot for the goal of using it as an efficient payment system. So it's not a hard fork like we've seen in the past. So you know that Bitcoin has been forked a few times, and here's a chart of the forks. And what these forks were attempting to do was diverge from Bitcoin and create a token or a platform that was faster, that was less expensive than Bitcoin. But none of these really took off. I mean, Bitcoin Cash, Bitcoin Gold, yeah, these things are listed on exchanges, and you can trade them successfully, depending on when you buy and sell. But in terms of actually being used, nobody is really taking to the idea of using these things as payments. So the Lightning Netowrk is not a hard fork, but it's basically a layer that will sit on top of the blockchain and will basically try to establish relationships between people who have paid each other in the past and take those transactions off of the blockchain for a moment and then batch those back into the blockchain at a later time, so that the payments between people or entities who have transacted with one another in the past and have an established relationship, those payments will be processed faster and not eat up bandwidth within the blockchain itself for the other transactions to push through. What does it mean for Bitcoin? I don't know if something like this will save Bitcoin. Like I said, I do think that there are some some really innovative cryptos, especially in the payment space, that are coming out that have shown to be a lot less expensive than Bitcoin and transact a lot quicker than Bitcoin. And I think that using Bitcoin as a payment mechanism is definitely not going to be a viable option in the future. And what does this mean for Litecoin? Actually, I think that, you know, I mean, if you read certain articles about the Lightning Network, they're saying that it also could signify the death of Litecoin, because Litecoin was essentially the Lightning Network before there was a Lightning Network. Now, one thing to note, the Lightning Network is far from being development ready or deployment ready. It's in alpha right now, not even in beta. And there's definitely some problems with it. People are still trying to use it for some reason. And there are stories of lost Bitcoin because of people trying to use it too early. And the development team is actually warning people not to use it. So, but you know, people can't help but experiment. We'll see what's to come from this new feature, this new development, and I'll keep you updated. But I don't know if it will have a big impact on Bitcoin, and I don't know if it will signify the death of Litecoin, but it definitely continues to speak to the problem of Bitcoin being a less viable candidate for a full-on payment system that can be used by everybody. I think that there are other cryptos that already can do that better. And as the space continues to progress, those things will rise to the top and kick Bitcoin out of the number one spot. The last thing I wanted to talk about today is Bitcoin. So Bitcoin seems to be in the midst of another market pullback. This is the 14-day exponential moving average. This is the 100-day exponential moving average. These two things don't converge often. And they've only done so 4 or 5 times in history. And every single time it's been the start of a downward spiral for Bitcoin. Now, a few things could be fueling this. January's been a tough month for Bitcoin, right? So in terms of news, there was the Korea and China news after the New Year's, or the FUD, I guess, after the New Year's, that affected Bitcoin. There was the closing of the first round of futures on the CBOE where the short positions won. That was around January 17th, I believe. There was the first round of futures that closed on the CME on the 26th. Now there's the Tethered Controversy and headlines saying that the only reason that Bitcoin's price is inflated is because of Tether, and because the people behind Tether were just pumping more money into Bitcoin and using people's reserves to pump more money into Bitcoin. As we just talked about with the Lightning Network, there's more and more discussions about Bitcoin being a less viable option for payments en masse. And I also think that part of this is affected by more and more traders coming in and educating themselves on altcoins. So when people first get into crypto, they're probably getting in to buy some Bitcoin because that's the first thing they hear on the news or the mainstream media, or now even celebrities are talking about cryptocurrency. So Bitcoin is usually the gateway, right? It's the entry point. It's the gateway drug. But as people start educating themselves more and more on altcoins and learning about the technology and seeing that there are actually more viable payment options for the future, and learning that they can actually make more money with some altcoins than Bitcoin at the moment, you see more money shift away from Bitcoin into altcoins. And the overall dominance of Bitcoin on the market cap is starting to decline. So all these things combined, it's been a pretty rough January for Bitcoin. What does the long-term future hold for Bitcoin? I'm not quite sure. I'm way more bullish on Ethereum right now. We'll get into that in another video as I do technical analysis on Ethereum. But I'm way more bullish on Ethereum, as are a lot of other people in the space. But I will say that one thing to watch out for, first of all, I wouldn't make any trades on Bitcoin at the moment. So I know that it's currently below 10,000, right? It's 9,900 at the moment. I wouldn't make any plays on it. If this 14-day and this 100-day converge, and the 14-day actually falls below the 100-day, then you can expect to see Bitcoin decline even further. Now, I'm not signifying that this is the end of Bitcoin, but do watch out for that 14-day and that 100-day convergence. And if the 14-day does fall below that 100-day, then you can expect to see a further decline. I'm holding off from buying any Bitcoin at the moment. I'm waiting to see what happens within the next couple of days. I might be able to get it for even cheaper. All right, that's it for this video. We'll be doing a Bitcoin giveaway at 10K. Leave a comment, leave your crypto addresses in the comments, leave a thumbs up on the video. Most importantly, subscribe.